you may be able to read that scoreboard behind me. It reads Aston Villa 1, Norwich City 0, and so many elements of that defeat we can copy and paste from fixtures we've seen beforehand. And that for me is really where the frustration in this Norwich City side is, because what we've seen in consistent bursts and consistent parts of games is that Norwich City are good enough to compete at this level. They can move the ball well, they can work space well enough, and defensively, in terms of open play, I feel like they've improved defensively over the last few weeks as well. Fundamentally though, what is not changing is the fact that they are having these periods in games where they are the better side, where they are moving the ball around well, but they miss opportunities, they squander chances. And fundamentally, if you do that at this level and you concede continually sloppy, soft goals to teams, ultimately you're going to lose games at this level. And it's not long ago that just around there, as I spin around, you may be able to see an Aston Villa training session, but just down there in May, Norwich City were crowned champions, and it feels like on the same pitch, merely a few months later, this is going to be the game that they look back upon as one that really set the tone for where they're heading. And as I said, this was a game that Norwich City, ultimately, if you look at the balance of play and you look at the trends, didn't deserve to lose, because they played well enough, they created enough chances, and were the better side for the majority of the afternoon. Crucially, one moment is key. Jack Grealish shows the quality of a Maisie run. That's laid back to Connor Southwell, and he sweeps the ball into the top right-hand corner of the net. And from there, Norwich did show endeavour, but Villa were compact in a nice, neat, low block, and they prevented any sort of break, any sort of space, any sort of attack that Norwich City were attempting to build. And fundamentally, we find ourselves back in a position where we're talking again about what could have been. Norwich City, of course, with Watford's impressive result at Bramall Lane today, a 1-1 draw, that sees them fall to the bottom of the Premier League table, 7 points adrift of safety. And those numbers there are quite daunting, really, given how much emphasis we put on this being such an important game, given where the two teams are in the division coming into this game. Villa, of course, had lost 4 on the spin, and we saw inside this ground today as well. It wasn't a happy ground to be in. It wasn't one that was content. Even when they were 1-0 up, it was quite niggly, quite angry, and I suppose that's the level of expectation that's created when you become a football club in the Premier League and you start to spend a bit of money. And sadly, I fear that may not be a situation that Norwich City find themselves in anytime soon, because too often we're sat here going and dissecting Norwich City performances and saying they've played well, they've moved the ball well, they've shown enough to warrant at least a point in game, but quite often 3. And we saw it again last Saturday against Wolves. We've seen it here again today, where they show enough that they could have easily walked away from Villa Park today with a win and with a different outcome and with a different outlook, crucially, on how they're playing. But yeah, let's talk about the first half then, because it was scrappy, it was devoid of a lot of quality, to be honest with you. Aston Villa, from both sides, it was a nervy encounter, evidently a game that neither side wanted to lose, given the magnitude of it, and yet Norwich City have. But in that first half they had chances. Buendia slots a lovely through pass to Timu Pukki. He can't quite get a shot away, gets his feet tangled, and the ball is eventually cleared. But another Buendia corner, this is moments later, is met by the head of Sam Byram. He heads it down into the ground, it bounces up and hits the crossbar, and it feels like at the moment like that kind of sums up Norwich City's luck, because and even at the end we saw Tom Heaton make a wonderful save from Onel Hernandez. We saw Alex Tetty's shot that looked at a certain goal just after the break, cleared off the line unbelievably by Douglas Luiz. And then when you look at David De Gea's mistake for Manchester United against Watford on Sunday, you perhaps wonder whether the footballing gods are quite on Norwich City's side. But ultimately, this is not about fortune, this is about a lack of quality. And I think what this season has shown us, on the whole, is just how pivotal confidence and momentum are to a football team. I remember in August when we were watching Norwich assert themselves beautifully, playing wonderful football against Newcastle United. won 3-1 comfortably, and perhaps set the tone for what we sort of thought the season could be from that point. And yet it's descended into one where they look quite fragile. I mean, the body language at the end today was pretty conclusive in terms of how they all felt. They were on the floor. They were devastated, quite frankly, and so were the away support, because, as I said, this was a game that was massive to both sides, and ultimately Norwich have fallen short of the standard. And to be quite blunt about it, Norwich cannot keep playing well for 60-70 minute periods and squandering opportunities, because if they do that and then concede another goal, as they have done consistently this season and on many occasions this season, ultimately that's a recipe for relegation. And it's difficult to pinpoint areas because it's not a lack of effort. Norwich are applying themselves well. I'd say that we had a spell at the start of the season where they were getting beaten comfortably 2-0 in away games, and they weren't quite in games. They were fully in this game, fully in it. They had opportunities, they had chances. A lot of their passages of possession were intelligent, they were cute, they were rather impressive at times. The fullbacks were supporting the attack. Buendia and Cantwell were coming central and looking to overload their central areas to try and slip Pukki in, and yet they've lost the game. And like I said, they lack quality, they lack confidence, and they lack belief, I think, in themselves at times as well. And what we saw with a Norwich City side in May that came here was a side who would play their football, who looked confident, looked composed, looked assured, looked perhaps a little bit arrogant in terms of how they turned up, but good arrogance. And what we saw today was a club and a team who is a mirror, who is a shadow of that. It's a shadow of its former self. And I think that shows really how quickly confidence can shift. It's a switch, isn't it? And when it's turned on, you can play football, you can assert yourselves, you can score goals, you can look attractive, you can look a really, really competent side. But this is the small margins of the Premier League, and ultimately they're going to decide whether Norwich City stay up or go down. And you have to say, at the moment, this feels like another big opportunity missed. And what you've got to put in context is the Wolves game where they led at half-time, the Sheffield United game where they led at half-time, the Leicester game where they were drawing at half-time, but they took the lead, the Arsenal game where they took the lead at half-time, where they were leading at half-time rather. Those are pivotal moments, and that is, for me, a bit where this squad's naivety gets caught out, because it is not quite good enough to manage those situations in games. And I think if you extracted Norwich's play this season between the boxes, there's been a lot of lovely stuff and consistently good stuff, and the way they move the ball is okay, a little bit slow at times, but the ideas are there, the ideas are on the pitch, they're consistent, they're working opportunities well, they're overloading areas in good fashion, they're pressing man-to-man collectively, and it's really difficult to stomach because of that, because this isn't a Norwich City side who are lacking effort, it's a Norwich City side who are lacking quality. And ultimately that leads you to the point of January and going, well, okay, they've got to invest and they've got to do that, but ultimately they're not in a position to do that. They're not in a position to push the boat out, because financially they aren't where they need to be for that to happen. And it really boggles the mind, because as we've seen in recent weeks, and we've probably seen, I've listed a few games there, there are so many more of that which Norwich City could have extracted points from and haven't. And I wonder if it is because of that soft underbelly, it is because of the nature in which teams are just taking their moments and Norwich are struggling to take theirs. I mean, Norwich could have been winning by half-time, and we saw the crowd in this place. We saw how angry it got, and how it vented. And even when they were 1-0 up, there were cries from the seats as I look to my right here of hold on to the ball. They could not keep possession, but yet they had this foundation, they had this low block, and you just wonder whether Norwich City need to become a little bit nastier. And by that I don't mean getting sendings off and being physical and being direct and altering how they play football. I mean, in terms of their game management, in terms of what they're doing out of possession, in terms of perhaps what they're doing on the ball, and it's just frustrating, because what we're seeing at the moment, Norwich City are not far away from being a very, or maybe not a very, but certainly keeping their head above water in the Premier League. And instead what we're seeing is a team and a club who are just slightly short of the required standard, and ultimately that's going to cost them. And it looks like it will cost them their place in the division. And this isn't a team that is known for waving the white flag, and it isn't a head coach that is known for waving the white flag. But just the way things are going at the moment just doesn't quite feel like the tide is going to turn, at least enough for Norwich to claw back that gap. And we've got a Watford side who have started to pick up a little bit of results, have started to get a little bit of luck in their favour. Southampton beat Chelsea today. They look like they're on a bit of a march after, of course, winning here last weekend. And it's difficult to know what to say beyond that, because Norwich City, as I've said, there's not too much in terms of performances that will concern Daniel Farke. It's moments in games, and we can talk about how well they pass the ball and the chances they create. They've got to be more clinical. They have to be more clinical. Timu Pukki ran through in the first half, and usually he slots that coolly into the back of the net, and it's just that psychological bit of doubt in his mind that tells him just to hold off, just to take that extra touch, just to bring the ball closer to goal. Well, I think last season we see him get the ball out of his feet and slot it into the bottom corner of the net, and those for me are the little bits in Norwich City's game that are costing them, and they're the thinnest of margins, and how do you coach a team's psychology? Well, you can't, ultimately, because it's results that breed that. I mean, if you cast your mind back to last season and what a miraculous and wonderful season it was, with Norwich City playing some wonderful football, ultimately that was stemmed from a 1-0 win against Middlesbrough that wasn't pretty, it wasn't handsome, but it laid the foundations for Norwich to go on and play. But with that being said, Norwich City have been at those junctions before. They have been at those junctions where they've won games, they've got a positive result, and they just can't quite consistently gather that momentum and gather that confidence enough to compete at this level. And that's the frustrating element of it here today. And it's difficult to dissect performances, but ultimately what I can dissect is the trends, because it's difficult to see where Norwich City didn't play well today. I thought their fullbacks were good. I thought the centre-backs handled Wesley pretty well. The midfield, although slow in possession at times, I felt moved the ball quite nicely and worked opportunities. But Norwich City cannot keep doing what they're doing at the moment, because if they do plan to survive, but it would be something miraculous from here, wouldn't it? And of course, the visit from Jose Mourinho's Tottenham Hotspur on Saturday as well is a bit of a daunting prospect at the moment, I think, given how their heads are going to be on the floor after that, and most supporters are as well, because you can be an eternal optimist, but ultimately what we're seeing on the pitch and what we've seen we're at the halfway stage of the season now, what we've been seeing on the pitch consistently isn't quite at the level Norwich City needed it to be to survive in this division. And that's not a dig at recruitment, it's not a dig at performances, it's ultimately what we've seen in the first half of the season, and I don't think anyone can really deny that, sadly. But that's where we are with Norwich City, and that's where we are after this defeat. And no doubt a bit of sort of more soul searching will be going on this week, but that is now Watford, Southampton, Aston Villa as well, that Norwich have failed to extract points from. And ultimately, if you want to survive in the Premier League, those are the games. You can do what you like against Manchester City and Leicester, because they aren't games that keep you in the division. Ultimately, it's what you do in that mini league around you, and Norwich City haven't won here again today, probably deserve more from the game. But as I said, it's the small margins that decide them. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you all had a wonderful Christmas. Hopefully this hasn't spoiled it too much. I'll let you get back to your turkey sandwiches. Thank you very much for watching.